Hello and welcome to Colleague 7 Sprint Review for 18.03.02. This will cover the work undertaken between the 20th of March to the 2nd of April. Starting with the sprint goal, and for this sprint the goal has been to update our skills lookup across the whole system to factor in skill aliases. Looking at the high level items and to explain further, in this sprint we've been working on updating the skills lookup so that it checks for skill aliases. This has been applied to all skill tabs throughout the system, as well as the skill criteria section when searching. The insert image option, which was introduced in the last sprint against emails and email signatures, has been tested and prototyped against the templates and create letter functions. We weren't able to deploy this in the sprint, sadly, but it will be part of the next sprint. We've made some updates to our asynchronous GDPR consent status check, which occurs when you're logging in. We were seeing notifications fail to trigger previously, but this has now been resolved. Sadly, the bug relating to the telephone number search on selection screens had to be dropped from the sprint. This was due to complications and us running out of time, so this will be carried over to the next sprint. In response to repeatedly raised feedback regarding the naming convention of our employment and education records, we've changed the naming convention of situation to now be experience moving forwards. And as part of this, we've also updated to include an option on the experience tab to filter on employment, education, unknown, and all record types. We'll now go through a brief demonstration on the key features from this sprint. Okay, so we've only got a couple of things to go through really as part of this sprint review. A lot of the workings of the sprint were for things that were sort of under the surface, so to speak. But in terms of UI changes and things that users will be able to physically see, if I just go through the skills alias update. So skills alias has been applied. It's been part of the system for a while, but the actual lookup in the skills wasn't factoring it in. So when you're within the lookups area in admin, and if you go to the skill categories area, when you're selecting a skill, it will load skills aliases. So this is for instances where you want to have alternative terminology for the skill name, or an alias basically for that skill name. So as an example, if we create a couple of aliases here, so let's say accounts, let's say accounting as an example. And what that basically means is if you do a search for accounts, it would also bring up account manager and it would advise that it was an alias. Likewise, accounting would bring up account manager, and it just means that obviously you can have your base set of skills, but you can have a whole library of skill aliases to ensure that that you have a solid skills library rather than a wide-ranging list of different skill types that all essentially mean the same thing. So that's now been added to within here. So if we go to a candidate record, if I just refresh that, and then if we go to the skills tab, and obviously if I just typed in account and tab that, obviously account manager is there. If I was to type in accounting, you can see that account manager is also there again, but this time it's got a bracket saying that it's been found via an alias. And likewise, if I was to type in accounts, same trick, essentially, it would advise it. Now, we did want to try and have it so that it would advise specifically the alias that had been found against the skill name to explain what had been found that way. But yeah, for a variety of different reasons, that became too complicated within this current sprint to deliver that functionality. So essentially what we've had to settle for is just advising as an alias what's essentially been found there. Just to demonstrate that it's been deployed, obviously this is a skill tab against an entity record, and that's the same for every skill tab that's in an entity record. Where it's also been allocated is against skill criteria as well. So same again, if you were doing a search for a skill here, if it was associated to an alias, it would bring up there as you'd expect it to. So that's just the same across the board for all skill lookups, and that's the update we've made in this sprint. Okay, the next point to cover relates to some terminology changes that we've made in the system, or one specific terminology change, and that's the renaming of situation to experience. So it was a common piece of feedback that we had received and were receiving often from clients, in that the terminology for what was basically our area for storing historical employment, education, any other sort of elements that fall outside of that as a history record as such, we were calling a situation. Yeah, the feedback we were often receiving was that that's not a industry standard terminology, but also that we'd have people actually asking what does that mean. Whereas obviously what we're trying to explain is that this is the experience of this candidate record in terms of what they know, what they've done, and that's essentially how we landed upon new terminology of experience. So we've renamed situation to experience throughout the system whenever it was being referenced in that manner. Also, what we've introduced is a type filter here. So what you can do now is, if you only are interested in employment, so when we say employment, we're talking about permanent placements, contracts, rolling contracts, any of those types of experience records that have been created from placements in the system, they're under the category of employment. Education obviously can be filtered on as well, and unknown is obviously for anything that falls outside of those those other sort of types that are set there, or you can have it set to all. We also have a user setting option as well, which you can set against the candidate, where you can essentially assign the default when listing that. So if you want to have the default as being employment, then you could do so, and on loading the candidate record, whenever going to that experience tab, it will only show employment records, so that it's what you want to see in terms of how it's been displayed. So that's the update we've made there. As always, if you have any queries or feedback, please get in touch. I'll be keen to hear from you. Also, for those using Colleague 7, feel free to submit your enhancement requests via the support team or directly to me via the above email address. The next video will be the sprint plan for 18.04.01, and as always, that will contain a high-level overview on the items we intend to work on during that sprint. Thanks for watching.